Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, and I'm over here having my head reassembled to my body with a couple of minions in Brooklyn, New York. But never fear, listeners, for I am not alone. Who is haunting this Romanian castle with me?
Oh, it's me, Steve Guntley from Austin, Texas, and I learned everything I know about podcasting from watching old episodes of Columbo. And this is the podcast. It's all about zombie moms, neck tendrils, and fading reflections. That's because this is a podcast about Bloodstone, SUBSPECIES II, the follow-up to one of Full Moon's signature early hits, and one that I think could argue is one of the best films in the entire Full Moon canon. I'm just going to cast my die on that one right now.
One can argue, and one, namely myself, will argue
One might be arguing that. And who else do we have here with us today to argue about this film?
Oh, this is exciting. So we've got a really special guest with us. This is a screenwriter and filmmaker who has done projects with the Boulet Brothers, Dragula, a bunch of movies on Netflix, including Christmas with You. He wrote and directed the Fangoria Chainsaw Awards. He's got a project called There's a Zombie Outside coming up. And you might have heard him as one of the hosts of the outstanding Midnight Mass podcast. I'm talking about Michael Varrati. Michael, what's up?
Hello. I am so excited to be here. I love Subspecies. I love this movie in particular. And I love the Full Moon universe, honestly, so I feel like I'm in the right place at the right time.
Oh, you absolutely are. We're delighted to have you. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk about this movie with us. I'm curious, kind of when did Full Moon sort of first enter your life? When did you kind of discover that you liked these kind of goofy movies?
Well, my very origins in horror are associated with goofy movies. I really discovered horror movies thanks to a show that aired in the late 80s and early 90s called USA Up all night.
Of course.
It was hosted, of course, by Rhonda Shear and Gilbert Gottfried, albeit on different nights. And I remember distinctly that one evening they were doing a double feature of Attack of the Killer Tomatoes and Return of the Killer Tomatoes. And I had seen it in the TV guide because that used to be how we had to find out what movies were playing.
Yeah. Michael, can I stop you for 1 second? This is insane to me that we have gone however many episodes we've gone. And this is the first time any of us or a guest, has uttered the words TV guide. Now, this was a formative book for all of us of a certain age. And I remember reading the descriptions of the movies, the star rating in the TV guide. And it was like, I was so excited when TV Guide showed up in the mail every week. And I would look ahead to see, okay, like, what's the plot of this show going to be, this sitcom that I watch on Wednesday night? Or what rerun, when is this episode of Mystery Science Theater that I've been trying to pop a VHS in and tape? When is that going to be airing this week? It would have the name and a little description. And I just can't believe that the nature of this show, it has taken us months and months for someone to finally mention the blessed TV Guide, Michael. So thank you
you're on
for
the
that.
board. You're on the board.
Well, I appreciate that. No, I mean, really, it was a book of wonders because it helped you find the things that you knew, but it also helped you kind of mythologize things you didn't. And so looking at something like the words Killer Tomatoes in print with no knowledge of what that meant, I was like, all right, well, this is happening. And I remember begging my mom to let me stay up and watch it. And she was like, all right, but she was worried I was going to get scared because she didn't really contextually know what we were getting into. So she wanted to stay up and watch it with me. And like 15 minutes into the movie, she fell asleep. And I ended up watching both of the films. And if you recall how USA Network used to do it is when Rhonda or Gilbert would sign off, they would just play the movies again back to back. And then basically I just stayed up and watched both of the movies again. And so I always say that was sort of my baptism into the world of cult film or horror because by morning I was changed. And part of it was this knowledge that these were not the kind of movies that my friends were talking about. These were not the movies that we were talking about at school or that were playing at the local multiplex. And even though it was a horror comedy, I viewed it as sort of like this kind of gateway into a forbidden world. And so I kept going back and watching USA Up All Night because that was sort of my knowledge of how to find these things. But then I started looking for them at the video store. USA Up All Night had a deal with Troma, so I saw a lot more Troma movies first.
Sure.
But from that, I got to know also the catalog of Empire films, which, of course, I don't need to explain to your listeners if they're here. And that was sort of my gateway to Charles Band. And then as I grew up and, started looking for movies and Full Moon became sort of a thing, I would rent those. And I remember kind of Subspecies being a big, big tentpole because I love vampires and gothic melodrama. And so, of course, this spoke to me. Trancers was big for me as well as just some of the other titles that kind of made their way into my life and have stuck ever since.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think I had a similar experience, but Troma was like my first entry point in terms of actually watching these movies. I think I was probably familiar with the box art from Full Moon movies first, but like in terms to actually watching these movies, it was like Toxic Avenger and stuff like that I actually started like really getting into sort of these particular breed of B movie.
Yeah, I think when you talk about this particular breed of B movie, sure, Troma was probably my gateway too. I definitely saw a lot of Troma movies before I saw Full Moon movies. And so I think that's why one of the things that's been really fun about the show is that like Full Moon as a company, you look at it and there's these movies that are sort of like all bets are off and they're just throwing shit at a wall from time to time. And it's like, man, they were just looking to crank anything out. And I feel that way sometimes about Troma movies, although maybe the mission statement for Troma movies was to gross you out a little bit more than some of the Full Moon movies. But every once in a while, a Full Moon movie manages to, have a meager budget, but the right people behind the camera and in front of the camera that can make it transcend low budget genre movie into something a little bit more. And I think this movie we're going to talk about today, Bloodstone, Subspecies II, is one of those movies where I don't think you look at this and you go, oh, this is such a late stage Full Moon movie. Oh, this has all of the tropes of a Troma movie, all the identifiable qualities of a Troma movie. This just looks like a movie and one you could have seen on HBO or Showtime in, 1993, shortly after its VHS release. And there's a lot of movies like this that were just B movies, but competently, or I would even say I would go beyond competently for this one. And it sort of sets it apart from some of the other things that we've talked about. So in your sort of hierarchy, or I guess in your chronology of discovering Full Moon movies, Michael, like, was the Subspecies series one you found earlier, or did you come to that one later?
It's sort of a mix. I had seen the original and I liked it, but it took a while for me to come back around and watch the sequels. And then I watched them in kind of quick succession and realized, oh, this is very much my kind of thing. And I will say that part of that has to do with Ted Nicolaou, the filmmaker behind all of the Subspecies movies. When you talk about this being a standout, I think that's in large part to his abilities as a filmmaker. When you look at TerrorVision, when he made that for Empire, and just the sheer production design and construction of that movie and how he brought that to the Full Moon world, even though the budgets were much smaller. Yeah. I think that is really present here. He is not content as a storyteller to have just enough. He goes above and beyond, and I think that really shows the breadth of his creativity. And it certainly does not help that they're shooting in, it does not hurt that they are shooting in Romania, which allows so much production value. And makes all of these movies look so good, especially for what they are. I mean, we know a lot of the Full Moon movies of this era were shot in Eastern Europe, but these are ones that make sense to be shot in Eastern Europe. So they get to lean into the settings. They get to lean into, like in the first movie, they go to that sort of festival with the Romanian people.
Such a standout moment in that movie, too. Really makes it feel like haunted and charged in a really interesting way.
Yeah, and in this one, we see the streets of Bucharest, and it's really just wonderful. I mean, the shadow work in this movie in Bucharest
so much
is
fun.
Great, yeah. And that's it. It's not merely having it, it's using it. And that's what really makes this movie work for me.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a really good point. I think Bucharest is at such an interesting time in history at this point, too, because we have this mix of like this old world opulence with kind of a just post-war like modern era where they're rebuilding, they're reconstructing. And so you have the shabbiness kind of mixed with this grandeur. You know, there's a great scene in the movie where Michelle is walking like barefoot across this huge palatial like lobby with all this gorgeous artwork everywhere, and it's just, you really get a sense of how kind of grand this country is or was or is trying to be again. And so it makes it feel like a very charged location, and it gives it an extra energy that I think really comes through.
Absolutely.
Let me rattle off a couple of stats here about Bloodstone before we get into the movie proper. Bloodstone, Subspecies II, was released May 26, 1993. It is directed and written by Ted Nicolaou, as will all of the Subspecies films from here on out. And this stars Anders Hove, Denise Duff, Kevin Spiritus, a.k.a. Kevin Blair, Melanie Shatner, Michael Danish, Eon Haiduk, and Pamela Gordon. So we talked about the first movie a couple of weeks ago, and it was famously a struggle to make. Ted Nicolaou is identified as one of the hardest films he's ever worked on, and it's a sentiment that's been shared by many of the cast and crew and Charles Band himself, because it was the first American film to ever be shot in Romania. And it was coming at a time when the December Revolution of 1989 that saw Nicolae Ceausescu executed and his dictatorial reign brought to an end, that had just happened in 1989. So just about a year before they started filming in Bucharest. And so things were still very much up in the air. It was the Wild West, except it was, Eastern Europe. They didn't really need permits to film anywhere, but they were also at risk of crime, of being cut off. Like the communications weren't really set up. Like the resources that they needed weren't really there unless they brought them in. So it made things to be very, very challenging. But as things have progressed, the cool thing about the Subspecies series that we're going to see as we go on is that we get to kind of see Romania sort of rebuilding itself around these movies in a really interesting way. And so this second movie, you can tell that Ted Nicolaou has sort of figured out how to work in this environment. This is a much, much more confident and assured and polished movie than the first one was. And it cuts a lot of the extraneous stuff. Let's start right off with the subspecies, okay? The titular subspecies of this series have one appearance in this movie in the opening 5 minutes, and we do not see them again. And I don't think they're really an element in the story going forward. They kind of started because it's a cool poster design, and it was part of Charles Band's mandate to have little tiny terrors in every movie if he could help it. Well, and it's
so much better, too, because they recognize these really don't drive the story at all. But in the first movie, they were a big part of the budget.
They were, right. Yeah.
And here, it's like, well, they're not spending money on these little subspecies effects, and there's less stop motion and stuff that's taking up more money and time.
Yeah.
And so they can use that money on some other things. And one of the places where the money is spent that I think comes across the best is bringing on Wayne Toth and Norman Cabrera to do the special effects makeup. Because I think right from the very beginning, these are some dedicated guys. We had a nice chat with Denise Duff and Kevin Spiritus about the experience shooting Subspecies 2 and 3, also about Subspecies 5, but we spent a lot of time with those talking about those early years in Romania shooting, and they had nothing but amazing things to say about these guys, and they really elevated. I mean, I've been waiting, I should say, for us to do this episode proper so I can talk about that opening scene of Radu reassembling himself and how reminiscent of Rob Bottin it is.
I was thinking of Rob Bottin immediately when seeing it, and also I think it might be the single best special effects shot in the Full Moon canon, at least of the ones that we've discussed so far. Like the moment of a Blade attacking in Puppet Master 2 is up there. That's a really impressive feat of stop motion, but this looks fantastic. Like to this day, this scene of him reassembling looks great.
Yeah, I think what's really important about this, well, first off, I love that you right off the bat bring up the fact that the titular subspecies characters or creatures really, from this point on in the franchise, play no more part.
No.
Honestly. And I appreciate that they understood that that's really not where this was going. I think that sometimes you have to listen to the story from a storytelling standpoint. And if they had tried to shoehorn those little monsters in, it would have only hurt these films.
Yeah.
So they use them to great effect here. They bring Radu back, and then it's sort of like, all right, what people are really here for is vampires, gothic melodrama, and whatever this story is that is between him and Michelle.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very clear that like Michelle is emerging as sort of the driving force. And I do want to talk about that because that is a huge change up that we have here, and I think something that really makes this movie and makes this series going forward. So Laura Tate played the character of Michelle in the first film. She, we talked a little bit about her when we got into that. She's a incredibly striking film presence, but not a terribly skilled actress. By her own admission, she retired from acting shortly after this. They did offer for her to come back, but she had a particularly hard time shooting the first movie. It just all the conditions of working there and being separated from her kids for several months while she's clear across the world. It was just a little bit too much for her, so she declined to come back. And that left the door open to a new actress named Denise Duff, who is going to come in and take on this role from here on out. So Denise was she's a New York-born actress. She appeared in a handful of commercials and a couple of walk-on roles before this in shows like Matlock and Northern Exposure, and a couple of low-budget movies like the sequel to Hell Comes to Frogtown. But I think this is the movie that really kind of launched her to the sort of cult figure that she is today. As Jared mentioned, and you guys listening are probably going to hear it within a week of listening. We haven't decided where it's going to go, but within a week of this episode dropping, you are going to hear our lengthy interview that we did with both Denise Duff and our other new cast member, Kevin Spiritus, who is here credited as Kevin Blair. Those two became best friends on the set of this movie. They're still best friends 30 years later, and we talked to them together. Denise is so charming. She's tough. She's funny. She takes no shit, and she's very honest and just a really cool lady. Really cool to talk to. And Kevin was just kind of a charmer. He was just a sunshiny guy. Really excited for folks to hear that interview. But I think they bring so much to these roles.
I love how close they are, especially when you consider the fact that in both this and the next movie, they do not really share screen time at all. No,
they really don't. Yeah, he's kind of off with the other new addition here, Melanie Shatner. Of that Shatner family. They're kind of off doing their thing. Yeah, Kevin is playing Mel Thompson, who is a American Interpol investigator who's helping Melanie Shatner's character of Becky, who is Michelle's sister, to find her sister. And they're kind of off in their own thing. They get some fun little entanglements with the wacky Romanian police detective and a old school vampire hunter, who are lots of fun little Romanian character actors in here. But Denise really would stick with the series from here on out. I think she's the only one that's in all of them except for I don't think any of them are in vampire journals.
And Kevin, I believe is just in 2, 3, and 5.
Yes.
Not to spoil too much about 5, but don't look for Mel Thompson.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's a prequel. It's a lot of interesting stuff going on in that one. But I think she is just a much. I feel like I'm picking on Laura Tate. I don't want to pick on her, but I think Denise is just such a more emotionally rangy actress. I think you believe that she has kind of the tenacity to get through a situation like this. Like Laura Tate's performance was always a little more delicate, a little more victim-like. And Denise never really feels like a victim. I think.
Well, I think that Denise enters with confidence, right? And I
Absolutely.
think that's actually key to this entire movie. And I feel for Laura Tate because the first movie, as you said, was difficult. They were getting their bearings. And, speaking as someone who does independent film, they are always rife with issues, but not these kind of issues. Going to a country post-revolution, dealing with like a whole new landscape you're not familiar with.
Yeah.
The fact that they had to get their growing pains out while making the movie is really a testament to the team, but it's also understandable why if you really were not sure to begin with, you may not want to come back. So then when Denise Duff enters, she does enter with a confidence that is also matched by the film she's in.
Yeah.
Ted Nicolaou knows what he's doing in this landscape now. I also think that this movie is really, really more assertive in what it's trying to do. And we see this a lot with the Full Moon sequels, right? I think, and this is not to decry any of the original films of any of the franchises, because obviously they launch a lot of these. But what's really interesting about Full Moon specifically is I think they utilize the sequels to really, really establish what the universes are.
I would agree with you.
If you look at the first Puppet Master, which we did on Midnight Mass, it's an interesting kind of curiosity because we kind of culturally remember it as being a puppet movie, but it's more like a bunch of psychics hanging out at a spooky hotel in this sort of like
absolutely
the puppets are weirdly
Italian
incidental to that plot. Yeah.
But then you get Puppet Master 3, for example, which really lays in the mythology. And I think that this is where we really start running with what the world of Subspecies looks like. This, to me, feels like Subspecies. I think 2 and 3 collectively are the linchpin of the mythology. Without these two movies working in concert, it wouldn't work, and we wouldn't love them in the way that we do, or wouldn't be, doing a podcast about it.
Absolutely. No, I agree. And I think that's one of the cool things about this series. Like, if you compare this with Puppet Master 2, a movie we like, a good solid movie, that one really is more of a riff on the first one. It's kind of just like a do-over of the first one with just maybe a slightly different tone to it and a little more focus on the puppets.
It's less Giallo and it's more Universal monsters.
Exactly. This one's kind of a teardown. Like, they're recognizing it's like, okay, we were trying some stuff in the first one, but our conditions weren't great. The plot didn't totally make sense, and we were introducing some elements that weren't really interesting to us or weren't really connecting. And so here we go. First movie of this new series. Ted Nicolaou is now solely in charge of this series from here on out, which is unusual for Full Moon. Charles Band likes to hire his usual stable of people, but they come in as jobbers, really. They're like, we'll take on this. It's not really about establishing a particular tone. But Ted was allowed to go nuts with this and sort of make it his own. And with this one, it's like we're getting rid of, like I said, we're getting rid of the subspecies. We're getting rid of this whole brotherly conflict. Stefan is staked in his coffin in the first 5 minutes of this, and we don't worry about that anymore because it's far more interesting to follow the relationship between Radu and this young woman who is on the verge of becoming a vampire. And then we have that tension there of like, are they going to be nemesis? Is he going to be a mentor? Are they romantically connected? Are they emotionally connected? So we have a lot more tension, a lot more stakes, and it's just a more interesting story. And I think settling it down and just making it a straight gothic vampire movie was the right decision to make.
Well, I love the reference of the Universal monster appeal of the second Puppet Master, because when I think of these movies, I think of them as more akin to Full Moon's attempt at Hammer horror, specifically the Dracula run with Christopher Lee.
Definitely.
Because if you look at kind of that run, they're gothic. There's always sort of like a larger stake involved, but a lot of those movies run right into one another. You see Christopher Lee go under the ice in Dracula, Prince of Darkness, and then we see in the next movie he's brought back to life in a very similar circumstance. And what's really great about the Subspecies movies, as opposed to Puppet Master, which takes place over like 80 years, from Subspecies, the first one, all the way through the end of the fourth one, we're looking at a matter of like 2 weeks, maybe. Like the whole franchise elapses only over a short amount of time. Like the worst time in Michelle's life, for sure.
Memorable couple of weeks. But yeah, they actually shot Subspecies 2 and 3 simultaneously. They just kind of did them back to back. And so we do have the cliffhanger at the end of this movie that leads directly to the beginning of the next movie. And that's unusual for a film series to shoot that way. I think at this point it had just been like Back to the Future, and that's about it for doing that kind of back-to-backing.
And we talked about the Video Zone, Full Moon's Video Zone, as being such an amazing feature. And one of the things when I watch some of these old Video Zones, it makes me wish I had discovered some of these movies a little earlier, because I can imagine, you rent the VHS of Subspecies, you go home and you watch it, and then it's a cliffhanger, but then you have the Video Zone, which not only has behind the scenes of the movie you just watched, but then has like a teaser trailer for part 3, which was also shot, and behind the scenes footage for part 3, which I think is such an amazing idea. I think this also is as good a time as any to kind of bring this up. In our conversation with Denise Duff, I said this to her in talking a bit about her introduction in the series, but what I find so impressive is that I know the character it isn't so well established by Laura Tate, but Denise Duff is coming into a pre-established role. And for the first 10 minutes or so of this movie, there's no dialogue. And she has to do a lot of acting just with her face and body to convey this relationship between Michelle and Radu. And I think she does such a fantastic job because without talking, she slides into a role that you just saw a completely different actress playing. And it's not only apparent that she's Michelle, but it's also apparent her motives, her feelings, like what's going on when she's fleeing and then going to Bucharest. Like, I think she is just really solid right out of the gate and just making you understand that character and feel like it hasn't missed a beat. And I feel like that's not the easiest thing to do. I know it wasn't like, I think Denise says in the interview that, you know, it wasn't like it was Jamie Lee Curtis or someone who played her first, but still it is an established character in a property that already exists. But I just feel like, yeah, everything that I think of now for Subspecies really gets kick-started in this first 10 minutes of this movie.
Yeah. No, it's a masterful performance from her. There's no question. And that is not anything that any actor wants to take on, because there is a burden there. But I will say her skills are obviously present, and also the script lends itself to this, because this is a character in transition at the beginning of the movie. The Michelle that we ended Subspecies on is no longer. She has been bitten. She's changing. And that, like, must have been a great relief to Denise Duff as well, whether she consciously or subconsciously took that, because she knew that she gets to take Michelle in a different place because this is a changed woman. And I think that what she does with the character also defines the rest of not just the character, but the franchise, to be honest.
And it's really nice that Nicolaou and is kind of letting this story breathe a bit. I think knowing that there is going to be a second one means this one is a little slower paced than a lot of other movies, but not in the way like with certain movies we've had where it's like they just feel like interminably slow and boring. Like this feels like we're getting to live with the character a little bit. We're getting to experience a little bit of what she's going through. And it's cool that Nicolaou would have the confidence to just say, okay, look, take some time in this movie, build it out, like hint at a couple of things that are going to be coming later, but this is a movie that doesn't blow its entire wad, and like this original 86-minute movie, you know, there's more to come. It whets our appetite for that, and it allows us to live in these kind of character beats.
I could have done with 20 more minutes of Denise Duff hanging out in that metal club.
Sure. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, we'll get a whole spin-off. We'll get James Franco to make a pretentious movie about the shooting of that scene. Yeah, it'll be great.
Well, it's like that scene is great, but just her walking the streets, like the on location shooting again, serving the materials so well, like her also just, and you mentioned, Michael, in the beginning, like the shadow play of him, sort of the little cat and mouse that's going on, and some great shots at the train station of Radu as well. It's like that kind of stuff. It's like there's effects moments and there's moments where the characters are just, like you said, Steve, it's kind of, the movie's kind of just breathing a little bit. But I feel like I think they recognize like that they had this sort of ace up their sleeve with the location, and they use it. I feel like they're willing to just kind of be in this moment and let a feeling permeate. And there's moments in this movie where it's less bogged down by plot or exposition. Like the plot is very simple, and it's, if we're going to be really specific and sort of critical about it, it is really the plot of half a movie.
Sure.
But that's fine. I never feel like, okay, well, what's going to happen? You get what's happening, and you just kind of follow the characters for a little while. And because it is in assured hands, and because it is Anders Hove again reprising the role, like we talked, I think, in the first Subspecies episode we did about how one of the things that stands out in the series is that the same person, like similar to Robert Englund playing Freddy Krueger, the same person plays Radu every time. And so there's a consistency of performance, and you'll get that with some of the actors over at least 3 of the next 4 movies. And I think that we just hang with them for a little bit, and I am totally fine with that. I'm just happy to watch these people work a little bit and look at some of the amazing on location Gothic Romanian locations that they found.
Well, I think that in the pantheon of full moon movies, Subspecies lends itself most to just vibing, and we are fine with that.
Yeah.
These are movies that are more about like a general vibe. I mean, yes, there's a story, and it's like a grand Gothic story, but like you're saying, it's half a movie, but doesn't matter. We get to see her wandering around Bucharest. We get to see her kind of in real time living her nightmare, which is what Gothic storytelling is.
Yeah.
And I think especially when you think of this era that this movie came out, and what Charles Band is really good at doing, as well as anyone who kind of comes from that Roger Corman school of filmmaking, where you take a look at the thing that's popular and you filter it through your lens, whether that's kind of the gross green sliminess of Troma, or it's the wild and woolly world of Charles Band, or whomever. He was able to, with Ted Nicolaou, look at Gothic storytelling, but also the vampires of the moment. And this feels very informed by the work of Anne Rice. You have like this kind of thing where she goes to this like punk metal club, which is very much the now, and then immediately goes to this like opera house, which is the then, and sort of that juxtaposition of vampire storytelling that she was really good at doing.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that through that full moon Charles Band lens, and it's sort of like, it doesn't feel derivative, it feels respectful, but also like, we know what you want out of vampires in this moment, and we're going to give it to you, but we're going to give it to you our way. Also, there's going to be a witch and other crazy shit.
Yeah. I mean,
Absolutely. Great point.
This is kind of like where the thing that we've sort of discovered about Charles Band's modus operandi, especially around this era, like as the end of Empire, the beginning of Full Moon. The thing that really separates a Full Moon movie from a Troma movie is that Charles Band wanted legitimacy in a way that Lloyd Kaufman actively laughed at. You know, like Lloyd Kaufman wanted to make the most puerile, the most goofy, the most gross, the most gleefully stupid stuff he could make. And Charles Band never really wanted to do that. He wanted to make real movies with like a quarter of the budget or even less. Like he wanted to make movies that could compete at the theaters. He wanted to make movies that would hold up to scrutiny. And sort of the sad trajectory that we've seen with Full Moon as we get into kind of the latter half of things, when like the financial struggles necessitated adopting more of a Troma model, is that we lose a little bit of that spark that we get with something like this. Like this, we've called Subspecies kind of the prestige series of Full Moon, like in a way that like Puppet Master isn't really going for. Nothing else is really kind of aiming for this level of sort of sophistication. And even like you said, you know, like, yes, maybe that's a little derivative to have her wandering between like the old world and the new world in a very literal way. But for a movie like this, for a movie that's pitched as a direct-to-video B movie that's on the same shelf as Toxic Avenger 4, that's pretty cool that they're putting that amount of thought into it, and that there's subtext and some thinking behind all of that. I think that's the really cool thing that sets them aside.
Yeah, I just think it's an approach. I mean, when I am a big Troma fan, and I think that what Lloyd is doing is a punk rock approach to filmmaking.
For sure.
Sure.
And Charles' approach is born out of the kind of pantheon of horror movies that he grew up with. I mean, lest we forget that he is a child of the movies. His dad used to make, you know, B movies himself. So it's sort of like their paths are different, but I know that, you know, there's a synergy between their studios as well as each other. I always like seeing them interact.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, there is something specific about Subspecies, and I think that does really, really ring true in this movie, where you see it's reaching for an artistry. And I think it achieves that artistry because it knows that you can tell a classic story in a classy way while also giving the kind of Fangoria magazine beats that people want.
And I think that's no better demonstrated than with Pamela Gordon's performance in this as Radu's zombie mom, who boasts some of the most impressive makeup effects that we've seen on this movie. Like Pamela Gordon is a small, petite woman, and so she looks very desiccated already. And it really helps aid the effect of like this living skeleton that's sort of like falling apart and barely functioning anymore. And it's really impressive effects on here. And it's kind of a nice surprise when Radu's like, oh, I guess I'm going to go visit my mom now. It's like, what? You have a mom? What? Vampire mommy? Like, we didn't know about this. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I killed my brother. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, big deal.
Yeah, she seems nonplussed about that.
Yeah. I mean, look, she's got a table full of like bubbling potions and things like that. Like, yeah, see, that's exactly the kind of stuff. Like, that is so. That's the closest this movie comes to like really embracing the cheese ball is like in the moments with the zombie mom. I mean that in a good way. Like we get the bubbling cauldrons and we get all the magical potions and the mystical daggers and things like that.
Well, listen,
out over a big wooden table.
That's what it takes. That's what it takes to get Angus Scrim out of the picture.
That's what it takes. Yeah, you gotta dissolve him. Yeah. I mean, but that's where they find a good balance in that. And Anders Hove is he's so alien and so unique as a performer that we get some camp value a little bit out of just watching him do his thing, watching his sort of implacable accent. For those who don't know, he's a Danish actor from Greenland. So if you want to know what a Greenlandish accent sounds like, that's what it sounds like. But nobody else looks like him. Nobody else sounds like him. And giving him these long fingers to kind of like mess around with is just, that's just giving catnip to the kitty. He's going nuts. He's having a great time. And so we do get that nice little balance of kind of B-movie camp with some actual like prestigious acting and storytelling.
Right, which is what we want.
Absolutely. That's the right balance to strike, I think.
So much so, I will say, Steve, that I am holding in my hand right now a Subspecies lunchbox.
Ooh,
from Forbidden Planet. Although I will say it is anachronistic because it only says Subspecies, yet it is Denise Duff and Anders Hove with the Bloodstone being held up by a couple of Subspecies. So it's the cover art of Bloodstone Subspecies 2. The lunchbox does not say that. It just says Subspecies, and I hope someone got fired for that blunder.
Hey, maybe. I hope they got a promotion because I think they're just backing up everything we're saying here. That this is kind of the exemplar of this series. This is
you're absolutely right. That when my brain thinks of Subspecies now, like when Subspecies 5 was coming out earlier this year in the limited Alamo presentation theatrically, my brain went to Subspecies 2, 3, that story arc right there. I didn't even really think a whole lot about the first movie. So I think you're right, Steve. I think I think this is now becoming synonymous with what people think of when they think of Subspecies.
Well, 2 and 3 are, as we mentioned earlier, together they work in concert with each other. This ends in a cliffhanger and 3 immediately picks up. Mm-hmm. And so it's all sort of like one big movie. And when that is the meat of the franchise, I mean, you've got 2 movies back to back, which together are over 3 hours. This is the bulk of our mythology. Everything else centers around this. And it almost makes the original movie feel like a prologue to what this sets up.
You're absolutely right.
And I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, it's sort of that thing where if a franchise goes on long enough, and not that I'm comparing Star Wars to Subspecies, but there is something to be said that when you think about what you get in A New Hope versus what we know about the franchise, we are way more informed by everything that came after than Mark Hamill hanging out in some sand, right?
Yeah.
It's like Empire Strikes Back is really kind of the mode of visuals that people think of and everything afterwards. And so it makes sense in that way that the stakes are higher, the character definition is deeper. I mean, Michelle's story is the story of Subspecies. It's kind of that great switcheroo where you think this is Radu's story, but it's Michelle's story.
Yeah.
And we really, really get the character work here because it's the end of a woman's life and like her birth into a new one. And that's deeply fascinating.
Absolutely.
And he's already a decrepit monster. She's at the beginning of her journey. So she gets to see what this is and like the horrors of that and the wonders, et cetera, XYZ. I really think 2 and 3 are... I mean, they're what make me excited about these movies.
Absolutely. I mean, I know I have not seen 4 yet. I know 4 is not very well liked. Vampire Journals is pretty well liked, but it's its own thing, it's its own kind of little side story. And then 5 is great, but it's a prequel, so it doesn't really have much to do with what's going on here, other than to kind of like do some preemptive set dressing, So this really does, this 2 and 3 is really kind of where the meat of the series is. I also wanted to spot a trend that I hope this continues, and I hope we can keep finding this.
Sure.
This is now the second movie that we've covered in which the villain beats the shit out of a skeleton. Not to be clear, not a living skeleton, not like one that's playing xylophone on its ribs. No, this is a dead person taken out of the ground and then just having the shit kicked out of it. So between this and Pit and the Pendulum, I'm hoping that we're seeing an ongoing trend here. Get a few more of these.
Well, it makes sense. Like, it's got to be good for you to get those demons out, right? The skeleton can't fight back. Nobody's getting hurt. You exhaust a little bit of energy, and you didn't hurt any living people in the process. Like, I don't know why more people aren't just beating the shit out of skeletons.
I'm going to say it right now. When I die, I'm going to donate my body not to science, but to the local boxing gym. I just want you to put me in a bag.
It's the only proper anger management that Radu does over the course of 5 films. So
I'm going to say he's not super emotionally well adjusted. Yeah, this is the one thing he does. It's sort of like,
well,
okay,
we've met his parents, so
yeah, it's true. I'm just saying, take him to a rage room. Put him in a room with a bunch of plates and stuff. I think that'll be therapeutic for him.
That I want to see. Where's that side quest of a movie?
Yeah, right. See, I want to see that. I just want to see.
Well, let's get our Kickstarter for Subspecies 6 started.
Yeah,
and then we'll see if we can go from there.
Subspecies 7, Radu gets really high and plays Grand Theft Auto for 6 hours. There we go. I just want him to calm down.
So we thought about we contemplated lumping 2 and 3 together into an episode proper, and then the more we thought about it, we said no, let's actually break them apart so we can sort of focus more on one, because we do think, and I think it's pretty evident in the way that we've been talking about this. And how this movie went on to shape what we think of with the rest of the series, that this movie is deserving of its own episode and deserving of the deep dive in that way. So I'm pretty sure we'll have similar things to say, maybe not as laudatory, but similar when we do an episode on 3 proper. But with this movie, I've seen, this is probably the full moon movie I've seen the most. I think when I watched it yesterday again for the recording, I think that was probably like my 5th or 6th time that I've seen this movie.
Okay. Yeah.
And so it's one that I've thrown on multiple times, and I'm always just taken in by it immediately. The amazing special effects scene of Radu reassembling his body in the beginning grabs me every time right from the beginning. I'm also a really big fan of the main theme.
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
of this movie. I think the score itself, there are notes in the score that I think are fine, are a little over or underutilized from time to time, but I genuinely really love the main theme, and to the point where when we recorded our episode on the first movie a couple of months ago, I was listening to that on Spotify for the next few days.
That's amazing. Yeah, this is a score by Richard Kosinski and the Amani Orchestra. So I think it's a Romanian orchestra that comes in. Yeah, they do amazing work.
So good.
Again, just that Romanian verisimilitude, you have the authentic sets, you have the authentic locations, the authentic vibe, and it just goes such a long way, especially when, vampirism is so inherently tied to this culture and kind of the mythology that surrounds this part of the world. I think
you've also got Norman Cabrera and Wayne Toth, who, besides doing the effects, to my knowledge, also played in the metal band in the club scene.
Oh, did they?
I didn't know. That's amazing.
Okay.
Yeah, so they were, I don't know if that means that they performed any of the music. They may have been just the actors playing the band on stage. That was unclear to me, and I'm not familiar with the band proper of who composed that song, but it's got a pretty, sexy goth typo negative feel to it, which I appreciate. And
no, I want to go to that club.
Absolutely. No, totally. I mean, there was, and that's, see, this is also something we didn't really talk about it in this way, but the first movie, some lush location shooting, but we happen to know how turbulent it was there and how tumultuous and how difficult the shooting of the first movie was. There's parts of this movie that really play like it's from the Romanian Tourist Council because it makes me want to go.
Yeah. Well, it's also that thing where sequel-wise, they just smartly went bigger. I mean, as beautiful as the first movie is, and it is. I want to clarify an earlier statement. I love every movie in this franchise. I think they're all great in different ways. But this does what a sequel ought to do. The first movie is a smart independent film in that they got a really great location or two, and they stayed there because that's what they could afford and that's what the story had demanded.
Yeah.
This, they took it into the city. We get to see other things. We get to see places. We get to see an expanded world to kind of sell us on the idea that it is not just Radu alone in a castle with people who wandered in. You know, it's that kind of split of Dracula in a way. You know, the first half of Dracula is Jonathan Harker alone in a castle with Dracula, and then he comes to the city. He comes to modernity. This is Radu coming to Bucharest, being like, look, I'm here, and I'm your problem now. And you're like, oh, I can't just go enjoy my goth punk band. I got to worry about this shit. You know?
Yeah. I have a almost certainly apocryphal story about Romania that I have to share here since we're talking about Romanian punk bands. A friend of mine, this was maybe about 15 years ago, was like backpacking through that part of the world. And he stayed a couple nights at a hostel in Bucharest, went out to go see a show, and he was like in this small little club, and he said it was like a Romanian language punk band where every member of the band was a dwarf from Romania. But the lead singer, he said, looked eerily familiar, and he couldn't quite put his finger on it until he realized that it was Jeff Mangum from Neutral Milk Hotel, apparently hiding out in Romania and playing with this all dwarf Romanian punk band. I do not believe that this is actually true. This is coming secondhand from a friend of mine, but I love the story, and I love to think it might be true.
That's amazing.
That's what that guy is up to.
Yeah, that's one of those, if, you know, whether it's true or not, print the legend, because the legend's cool, yeah.
Oh, 100%, yeah, absolutely.
No, I mean, this was a small club on that very famous Romanian island, Avery Island, right?
Yes, exactly.
Took an airplane over the sea to Avery Island, and they saw him fronting a band. Maybe Phil Fondacaro was in there somewhere, suspiciously absent from this. Unfortunately, I would have enjoyed a Phil Fondacaro appearance here.
I suspect it was just a guy claiming to be the king of carrot flowers, and he just put two and two together. But you know, I don't know. I can't be sure.
Well, I hope there's 3 people listening that are really happy that we've said these words.
Yeah, there's a couple of like old hipster nerds like us who are just like really loving this conversation. So we've been remiss in our podcasting duties. We have not been updating our rankings of these movies in a while. But I did want to bring that back around. I know we both need to like add to the spreadsheet and kind of figure out where all of these are.
I have been doing this in the most archaic way, which is I've been handwriting them in a notebook. So then every time a new movie comes in, I have to wedge it in between other ones, and it's a disaster. Like I
can do it the modern way, which is not forget to do it. That's my way. That's my method. I forget.
That is true. I adopted the modern way and forgot to do it many times. But I right now, if we're getting into rankings, I could definitely give you kind of like a top 3 or 4 and a bottom 3 or 4. I would have to really sort of retype this into an Excel spreadsheet to see where we're at now for the full range of the movies. But I will say, I've said this before. I was very excited to tell Denise Duff and Kevin Spiritus this on microphone. Bloodstone, Subspecies II is my favorite full moon movie.
That's a big distinction. Yeah.
And so, because we are a Charles Band podcast, we do not stick only to full moon. So that doesn't mean that it's going to jump to my number 1 spot. It just means it slightly edges out what I had so far as my favorite of the full moon proper movies we watched, which was Puppet Master 3.
Yeah. I think I'm in the same place, just because From Beyond is going to be pretty hard to top. Reanimator, once we get to it, is going to be pretty hard to top. But I think this is just an exceptionally accomplished movie. I think it really shows the range and the ambition and the things that kind of make Full Moon a little different from everything else that's gone on out there. I
agree with you.
I love it when they're trying to take this stuff seriously, and that's pretty fun that they got so close to pulling this off with like limited resources, not a lot of money, not a lot of prestige, not a lot of press attention, but they still put a lot into it, and I think that's really cool.
And when you look at my rankings, I mean, I've got From Beyond at number 1, which is an Empire movie, and now I've got Subspecies 2, and then Puppet Master 3, and then I have a couple of Empires thrown in there with your Trancers and Robot Jocks, and then even like Tourist Trap, which is pre-Empire, rounding out my kind of like top spots. But I'll tell you, man, sliding right in there as one of my favorite full moons, right up there towards the top, Blood Dolls.
Yeah, I think that's getting up there for me too. I got to say, I had a great time with Blood Dolls. But I wanted to bring that back around because I know that's Jared, that's where you landed on. I have this one pretty high as well. So
can I ask you, did your bottom change? Did your bottom 2 or 3 change?
Oh, you know what? It might, because Evil Bong is still down there, but like Witch House and Demonic Toys 2 were both really hard sits, like both right in a row, and that was kind of a demoralizing pair of movies.
I think there's going to be a Witch House renaissance. I'm just going to say it.
You think so? You think it's due for a comeback?
I'm gonna put it down here. When there's a Witch House revival, you heard it here first.
All right.
I believe it's happening. I don't know who the filmmaker is. Maybe it's Book Walter will be back. Maybe David will come back. I don't know, but someone's gonna. I think just franchise.
You will get all of the credit.
James Cameron walks in, writes Witch House on a board, adds an S, adds a $sign. Exactly. That's it. That's what we're gonna do.
Yeah, for me, it's like Witch House and Demonic Toys 2 and Evil Bong are really, they're kind of fighting for the bottom, the cellar dweller, if you will, which is a movie we'll get to very soon as well.
We might need to bite the bullet pretty soon and start cramming in a couple more of those Evil Bong movies, because man, we have so many of them to get through, and I think the longer we put it off, the more rotten they're going to get.
We really have put it off.
Skunkier, if you will. They'll just get skunkier. They'll just become stems and seeds.
Yeah, we had a rough stretch there of our Demonic Toys 2 and Witch House. And you know what's funny? It's like that also I think is no small part into why our review of this one is so glowing, because we came off the back of a handful of weeks, 3 out of 4 weeks maybe, where we were looking at that real late period Full Moon where they're so hindered by budget, but it also feels like people aren't really working together to make a finished product. Nobody seems to really care too much about the finished product.
No.
And I think what my sort of, as I get into final thoughts on this movie, is that from Ted Nicolaou taking this on as his project, writing and directing, to the actors involved, to the crew, and everyone seemed to be on board, understanding that they were going to tell a good story and make a good movie here. And this is like a prime example of Full Moon as a company when it's really at the height of its powers, and to use another cliche, firing on all cylinders. Like, this to me is the perfect example of where you don't need a massive budget to make a good movie and tell a good story that does involve practical effects and location shooting. I mean, yes, you can make a movie like Clerks where it's just a bunch of people hanging out talking to each other, but it's like for something as ambitious as this, you can do it still on the cheap. And that's what I love so much about this movie, is like everyone seemed to have the same end game, which was, we're going to beef up the mythology. We're going to tell a good story. We're going to have some fun effects. It's going to look nice. And we're all in it together. And that camaraderie really comes across. And then after watching it after Witch House and Demonic Toys 2, you're like, holy shit, this is a movie-ass movie.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, I think that this is a great example of what happens when a studio, big or small, has faith in the artists that they hire.
Yes.
Because we know, whether it be Full Moon or, Universal or Blumhouse, there are the movies that are creator-driven, and then there are the movies that are studio-driven. And They can all be fun, but there is a difference. And here is a series of films where Charles Band has given Ted Nicolaou the tools to do what Ted Nicolaou does. And it works. I mean, I really think that his artistry and his vision are on display. And I think about this because it's like Blumhouse, since I mentioned them, we see kind of their output, but then when they look at someone like Jordan Peele, who they let do what Jordan Peele does, when they let Chris Landon do what Chris Landon does, you get these horror movies that people are still talking about. And I think that in this way, Ted Nicolaou really, really is an artist who Charles Band, who, you know, is quite a shrewd and smart producer, and he knows when to step in, but I also think what makes him good is he also knows when to step aside. And he let Ted Nicolaou go and make these movies, and that's why we're still talking about them.
Absolutely.
Because there are plenty of other films that go on for sequel upon sequel upon sequel that are fun, but they don't build on the mythology. They don't have that kind of care and curation that someone who's with it the whole time is going to bring to it. And he really does. I really, really like his work here. And I think that in celebrating this movie, for me, it's as much a celebration of Ted Nicolaou and his vision, because, I mean, I love all 5 of the Subspecies movies. When I went and saw the 5th one at the Draft House, I was like a giddy kid, because it was more of what I love about this. And that's exactly thanks to him, and thanks to a studio that allowed him to do what he does.
Absolutely.
That's really well said. And I saw it at Alamo here in Brooklyn, and it was fun. And I remember thinking going into it, I was like, wow, you know, this is a really limited special thing that they're doing for this movie. They're promoting it a good amount. I was a little bit apprehensive going in of what the vibe of the crowd was going to be like. I was really wondering, like, are people going to go to this and being like, oh man, like, look at this thing that Full Moon are trying to do by like show a Subspecies movie in the theater. I was afraid that there was going to be a crowd of people, because also it took a little while for ticket sales to catch on. I remember I bought tickets kind of early and there were a lot of tickets remaining, but then the day of I checked and they were mostly sold out. And I remember thinking like, am I going to like try to enjoy this thing sincerely, and there's going to be a bunch of people who are watching this ironically and kind of laughing at things and stuff. And it really wasn't like that. It was a bunch of people who were excited to be part of this moment, to have this sequel that was, 25 years after Subspecies 4. And then when the little behind the scenes featurette came on at the end, everybody stayed, and everybody, you could tell, was just enjoying. It was like they were getting this weird communal video zone where we're watching Charles Band talk to you, and then you were seeing the actors hanging out together, and they were talking about the new cast members in Subspecies 5 and the location and all this stuff. And people, I think we're generally there for sincere support, and I appreciated it about that.
For sure. I think that about wraps it up for Subspecies 2. Michael, thank you so much for being here and lending your considerable insights. It's been I've had a really good time talking to you about this movie.
Thank you so much. I mean, I love these movies. I love this movie. I was honored to be asked to talk about this one.
Well, we hope to have you back in the future for sure. You've been great to talk to. Where can people find your stuff?
The best place to keep up with what I'm doing is just to follow me on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days at Michael Varrati. I'm also on Instagram with the same name. You can also keep up with Midnight Mass wherever podcasts are found, also at Midnight Mass Pod on X. We release new episodes every other Wednesday at midnight, where we worship at the altar of cult cinema and have crazy guests join us, including Ted Nicolaou, director of the Subspecies movies. He recently joined us to talk about TerrorVision. So, yeah, check it out.
Hell yes.
It's a great show. I listened to it. I wholeheartedly endorse it also. So take Michael's word there. They do an amazing job. Peaches Christ and Michael as hosts on that one, really fantastic. If you like what we do for this show, then jump on to Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you are listening and drop us a 5-star rating and maybe a brief review if you are so inclined to do so. If you want to follow us on our socials, you can find the show at puppetmasters_castlefreaks. You can also find my personal Instagram at _Giallo_Jerry and Steve at Minotaur Matador. We are on X. We are on Threads. We are on Blue Sky. We have a Facebook group. You just search the name of the show and you'll find the Facebook group. And we will be adding more to our YouTube channel in the near future. But we are not the only show where you can find Steve if you enjoy his luscious voice. Steve, where else can people find you?
Why, thank you. Yes, you can find me on the show Cinema Arcade. That's the show where we are watching a movie and then playing the video game based on it so we can compare, contrast, see how well they complement or disagree with each other. We've been having a lot of fun doing that. We just wrapped up the Alien franchise over the month of November, which was a really great time for me. I will always drop everything to talk about Alien. And we're going into the holiday season, so expect movies and games, including things like The Polar Express, Elf, Home Alone 2, a couple of other things that we're going to throw in there. So definitely check those out. As for us, next week, you can hear us talk about a movie called Psychos in Love, a movie I'm not familiar with, but damn, is that a good title. Psychos in Love. I'm excited to get to it. And also be sure to check your feed for that interview with Denise Duff and Kevin Surtis. We had an amazing time talking to them. My apologies right now to Kevin. I know some of his audio cut out a little bit. I was not able to salvage it, but we still had a delightful time talking to him. And they're both just great people. So check that out if you want some real insight, some further insights into the making of Subspecies 2. And we will see you next week for Psychos in Love.
Absolutely, Steve. And listeners, we may not on this show be going into anything too holiday specific for the month of December and beyond, but I will say we have a lot of amazing shows coming up and some real treats and some real gifts for all of you. So keep listening and we will see you next week for Psychos in Love.